But yes, as I mentioned, this is the ROR Community Call for July 2026, and we'll go ahead and get started now. But do please feel free to continue introducing yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are and where you're joining from. And the other thing we'd love to hear from you in the Zoom chat is how you're currently using ROR, or, of course, whether you're planning to use ROR, planning to integrate it into your systems. And of course, we're going to be talking today in depth about one of the things that a lot of systems are integrating into their software, which is the ROR affiliation matching service. So we'll be going into great detail about that. I know many of you have already used that or are using versions of that in your software. So we'll love to hear from you about that. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're still in the welcome phase of the call. Love to hear, as I say, how you're using ROR, where you're calling from, how you might be planning to use ROR. We're going to do a very brief rundown of the things that the ROR team has been up to and is planning to get up to in the coming months. That should take no more than a few minutes. And then we'll take just a brief period for questions and comments about any of that work. And then we're going to do what I call a deep dive into the ROR matching service. It is, to an extent, it's a training, it's a tutorial, but mostly really this is going to be about self-directed exercises and free-form discussion and comments and notes. So I'll give you very precise instructions about how that's going to go, but you'll have plenty of time to explore the service after a brief introduction to it. You'll have plenty of time to look into what interests you and to ask us questions. Notably, our expert, Adam Buttrick, who is our product lead and who was really instrumental in developing that matching service. So yes, there'll be a brief introduction to that matching service. I'll demonstrate a couple of things for you about how you can test it out, and then we'll do those self-directed exploratory exercises and then come back and share what we found and any questions. Just a little bit about these ROR community calls. We hold these every other month. They are open to everyone. We do tell you what's going on with the ROR team, new developments, any topics for community feedback that we're looking into. And typically, we do usually have at least one or two featured integrators of ROR who show us how they've built ROR into their systems and talk about why it's helped them in measurable ways. We announce these calls on the ROR Community Forum, which you can certainly join if you like. We also put them on the ROR Events webpage, and we announce them on ROR social media. These are meetings, not webinars. We do encourage you to participate primarily in the Zoom chat. You can ask questions during the presentation. We'll be monitoring the chat and happy to answer them there. Feel free to talk to one another if you like. We do record the calls, so this call is already being recorded, and we will send you the slides and the recording afterwards if you are a registered participant, which of course all of you are. We also publish the recording and the slides publicly on the ROR website and the recordings on the ROR YouTube channel. We ask you to abide by our code of conduct, and that includes please being mindful that the ROR is a global community. We have people here from all over the world. We have people who speak many languages, and it's a deeply held principle of ROR that we want everyone from all over the world to feel included. That being said, our calls are in English. If English is not your primary language, there is no problem with that. We encourage you to use the show captions feature in Zoom to show captions in your language, and that can help with these calls in English. We try to speak slowly, but we welcome everyone from all around the world to these calls. We don't allow AI note takers and bots, so we will remove those if you add them. We do ask as well that because this call is really about ROR generally, if you have really specific support questions about asking for a new ROR ID or making a modification to a ROR ID, we're really happy to talk with you about those, even to schedule a meeting about those. But this call is not really the place for that. So please just email support@ror.org if you have any questions about getting a ROR ID or updating the information in a ROR ID. If you'd like to get involved beyond these calls, you can always submit feature requests or bug reports on the ROR roadmap, or check that out to see what we're doing. We do have 2 separate community forums. One, the ROR Community Forum, is really for general announcements. As I said, we post announcements of these calls there. But we do have a ROR Technical Forum as well, where we post release announcements to tell you when we've made updates to the registry. And we use that technical forum for major changes to the ROR API or anything outages, which have been very rare. But if you do use the ROR API at all, we encourage you to join that technical forum. Anyone, of course, is welcome to submit a curation request. And if you want to tell us more about how you're using ROR in a more official way and be featured on our website, we have a form there that you can use to tell us about your integration of ROR. Right, so I'm just going to give you some brief news and updates about what ROR has been up to. We've published just a couple of blog posts. This first one, I think, has been getting quite a lot of traction, and it's the arguably second in a series of blog posts about ROR curation. And curation, of course, means the process by which we update the registry, by which we add new records and modify existing records. So this blog post includes an embedded video with 3 tips for you if you're thinking about requesting a new ROR ID. So please take a look at that if that's something you're interested in. And I will be following that up with a similar post on tips for if you're asking for modifications to an existing ROR record. We have Colin Knopschwin on the call with us today. Colin is on the membership team at Crossref and is a wonderful writer and wrote us a really great post about why they submit requests for new ROR IDs for new Crossref members. Colin has been a really wonderful supporter of ROR, and it's a very well-written post, and I think makes a great case for just the general argument of ROR's community-led curation model by which we take requests from anyone. Recently, Adam and our director Maria, who can't be here today, were at the Force 2026 meeting in Singapore, where they presented on ROR and research integrity, which is an important emerging use case for ROR. So the slides from that, I think not the recording, but the slides from that are on our website. And then obligatory pitch for PIDFest. Hopefully some of you will be attending PIDFest in Leiden. It's several months away still, but plenty of time to make plans to go to that. That is held every other year, and we're really looking forward to going that this year. We will be there. So I always like to share a few little data points about ROR adoption, and one of the really key milestones that happened recently is that we hit over 1 million records in Crossref, DOIs in Crossref that include at least one ROR ID. So we're really happy about that. And we're hoping that next year at this time, it's more like 2 million. You can see that I wanted to mention as well that these statistics, if you were to go in and compare them with previous statistics, they are going to be a little different because the methods by which we measure what kind of uses those ROR IDs are being used for in Crossref metadata, those methods have changed a little bit. So these statistics now are measuring assertions of ROR IDs. So for instance, if you have one DOI that has 5 authors and all of those 5 authors have their affiliation marked with a ROR ID, that's going to be 5 assertions in one record. So previously, we were reporting ROR ID use per record, and these are assertions, meaning the number of times ROR is used in a particular way. So that's, in particular, that has bumped up the affiliations number quite a bit. But it's still really, I think, instructive to see how people are using ROR IDs, because in particular, using ROR IDs to identify funders in Crossref record is a growing use case, and we always like to see that. DataCite ROR is all over DataCite, particularly for affiliation uses and publisher identification, and we're nearing the 10 million mark of ROR IDs in ORCID records, which is great to see. And we also passed in ORCID the 2/3 percentage. And that's for all ORCID records, but really it's more like 99% of new ORCID records are have where the author states an affiliation. That ID is almost always a ROR ID in new ORCID records. So we love to see that increasing adoption. Top providers of ROR IDs in DOIs for Crossref and DataCite. These have not changed significantly since I last reported them a couple of months ago. I did want to mention that ABES, which is, of course, the French higher education information organization, is going to probably be publishing a blog post about their edition of thousands of French dissertations and theses in Crossref and their edition of ROR for those. So let's look out for that. But in general, as you can, and I also wanted to call out MDPI because MDPI has been incorporating ROR into its workflows, and they have some really exciting new integrations coming out. So the numbers of ROR IDs in records registered by MDPI has really been going up lately, and we love to see that. And of course, if you want to get on this list, add ROR IDs to your records. And now we're going to hear from our product manager, Adam Buttrick, who's going to tell you about some of the recent product and technical work that we've been doing. Adam?
Thank you, Amanda. Can we pull up the first slide? Thank you. So in terms of our product and technical work, the main focus of our recent efforts has been on the core infrastructure upgrades I flagged on our last call. What this means is a lot of work to rationalize how our environments are configured, our deployment processes work, updating the underlying libraries we depend on across various of our applications, alongside things like database version upgrades. It's not always the most glamorous work, but it's very, very important to keep everything up and running smoothly, make sure all of this great affiliation matching that we're talking about is available to everyone. So we've been plugging away at this and expect this work to continue over the next few months into the fall. Oops, can you go back to product technical? At the same time, we've been hard at work on the beta of our new search UI. So for those who are new to this work, this is a refresh of the search application folks use every day via ROR.org, which we're now working on porting to a modern web application framework to both improve its overall functionality and design, but then also to add support for some of the great widely used API features, so things like our advanced search functionality. The news here is that we're just about at the finish line for the beta version of this new app, and we've been kind of circulating it with some partners for internal testing, gathering their feedback, and then doing some polishing and refining as we go. Their response has been very positive, so the plan is that we'll open this up to everyone for some additional testing and feedback, take another pass, of course, at refining based on what we hear, and then move to a full release sometime this fall. So we'll announce that public beta more widely through our various comms channels. So make sure you're subscribed to those, as Amanda highlighted, and more to come on this soon. Next slide, please. On the curation side, as we also discussed in our last session, over the past couple of months, we've been focused on improving the representation of funders in ROR in support of some broader community initiatives, and then also work by our parent organizations and partners. So this all, of course, occurs in the context of the ongoing deprecation of the funder registry, but also some great things like the upcoming launch of ROR-based funder matching in both Crossref and DataCite. So I see that Jason is on the call. Jason is responsible for that work. He presented at a ROR community meeting. Super great. We're excited that's happening. We've also been hearing from publisher partners who are working on migrating from funder IDs to RORs in their internal system. We're also trying to support the continued development of the Open Alex Grants Index project, which is proceeding along at a really exciting clip. And then also, there's been the recent call to action from the Barcelona Declaration Funding Metadata Working Group, which both heavily endorsed and is pushing for the switch to using ROR as the primary PID for funders. So practically speaking, what this has meant is some large-scale addition of new records for funders alongside some updates and mapping refinements based on feedback from various partners. So we have a big chunk of this work scheduled to land in our release next week. Once that is in, we should be at a very, very high level of coverage for funders currently in use for funding assertions. which hopefully puts everyone in a good spot to support, a smooth and productive transition to ROR for funders. Okay, that's all from me. I'm going to turn things back over to Amanda.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. I want to just pause here briefly, since we're going to have essentially 2 Q&A periods in this call, to see if anybody has any questions about that work. Okay, pause over. Do feel free, if something occurs to you later, post it in the chat. We will answer those in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to go into this deep dive into the ROR matching service. Find my notes. And yeah, I appreciate you're all joining to learn more about this. One of the things that I wanted to mention too is that this is the most popular endpoint of the ROR REST API. It's a service that we're really glad we developed, and we are glad to hear that you're all interested in it. So with that, I will get started. The first question, of course, is why do we offer this matching service? Why don't we just offer a data set that can be queried in kind of simple ways? And really, a lot of the answers to this are historical. Many of you might know that ROR officially launched in early 2019 as a minimum viable registry, which was a data set synchronized with the existing GRID organization identifier database, and a relatively, simple REST API, again, a minimum viable API in January 2019. So in the subsequent months, Dominika Zacek of Crossref helped develop a matching service for the ROR API, primarily because we heard from people in those intervening months that they really needed one. So we have a November 2019 blog post that says, quote, "We heard feedback from users that they wanted the API to be able to handle unstructured affiliation strings, including those containing multiple affiliations," end quote. So that was clearly something that we heard from our users that people wanted. The entire scholarly communication ecosystem is really full of these unstructured or semi-structured strings. The strings that are in the background on this slide are actually reasonably structured, but it's mostly with commas. And if you look closely at this, not all the information is even in the right order, right? Sometimes the organization location is earlier, sometimes it's later. So this kind of data is really hard to process, and it's all over the scholarly communication ecosystem. So the original use case for ROR was to build ROR into user-facing forms so that the API would drive an organization lookup. And people still use ROR for that. It's a primary use case for ROR, but that it requires human intervention. Somebody begins typing, and then there's a list that pops up, and they say, yes, that's the one that I mean. And what we heard really clearly from users is that they needed something that would automatically clean up all of these old text strings without the need for human review, without the need for human intervention. So we do also have a kind of a great tool called the ROR Open Refine Reconciler, where if you want to look at every single text string that you have and have a human review it and say it matches this ROR ID, that's a really great tool to do that for. But we have discovered that people really want this large-scale automatic matching service. So that's one of the reasons that we developed that. Systems like OpenAlex, which came out really not long after I joined in 2022, there's almost no way that they could do human review of every single unstructured affiliation string that they get. You can see in this GIF, right now they have 320 million scholarly works. And I would guess that probably a majority of those are not coming in with identifiers for those organizations. So OpenAlex was one of the key use cases where they needed a matching service. And there are lots and lots of large-scale services like this that need to develop programmatic matching or use ROR's programmatic matching service. The other use case that I've really been noticing a lot of lately, especially just in the last 4 years since I've been at ROR, is matching used in submission forms. So as I mentioned, we built, this is a very old model of manuscript submission form, and you can see it's just got those text fields there, one of which is for affiliation, and they're expecting the user to type in, I am affiliated with the University of Virginia or whatnot. But it would probably be really messy, multiple versions of that name and whatnot. This is an old type of organization form, and the original vision was that you could build a lookup into that field so that a user could choose it. But even that is now becoming a little bit old-fashioned, because the way that modern systems a lot of modern systems work is like this. You upload a Word doc or any kind of file to a system in a submission system, and you don't have to type in a bunch of things into fields, because the system will transform your manuscript. They will extract text from that manuscript and then ask you to just confirm it. And then usually they allow you to edit it as well, but you can see how this works. I did not type in University of Virginia at any point in this process, except on the file that I uploaded. The system extracted it, and I confirmed that, yes, that is my affiliation. And a lot of systems are working like this, and a lot of systems are using matching services, whether or not it's RORs, to match things to identifiers on the back end where users can't even see it. So an increasingly important use case, I think. So now let's talk about the ROR matching service itself. The ROR matching service is available via the affiliation parameter of the ROR REST API. It takes any kind of text string as input, and it returns a chosen match to a ROR ID when it can. There are 3 parameters available on the ROR API. The query parameter, which searches the ROR API with the expectation that a human being will choose one or more results. And this is used in the ROR web search. So if you're using just, you go to roar.org/search, you type in a name, you're going to browse through those and then click through to anyone that interests you. That's, again, imagining that a human is going to look at those. We do also have an advanced query parameter, which a lot of bibliometricians use, and that allows more complex search queries, and it's still expecting that a human being is going to look at those and go through those and select the results that they want. Now, the affiliation parameter is what we're talking about today. That's our matching service that can be used for automatic selection of matching ROR IDs. And do note that even though the parameter name is affiliation, you can, of course, search for any kind of organization information, not just author affiliations. You can put any string at all in there. So especially for funder names, you can put a funder name in there and it will find that. We just named it affiliation to begin with because that was the primary use case we figured ROR would be used for. But as it turns out, ROR is being used for all kinds of things. So do note as well that the string should ideally be URL encoded. And if you're not familiar with that term, it just means that the strings, if the string contains special characters like spaces and commas that aren't normally used in a URL that you would use to get to a website, you would need to represent those in a certain way. So there's a website where you can easily URL encode your strings, and I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. I did also want to mention that ROR data is in the JSON format, which is a very commonly used hierarchical data format. So that's what your results are going to come back as when you do these matching queries. Another thing I wanted to just clarify before we get into the exercises is the difference between what we call multi-search and what we call single search. Multi-search is what we call the original strategy developed in 2019. For matching text to ROR IDs, and single search is a newer, faster, and more precise strategy, and it's the default on that endpoint, on that parameter, and it's the one we recommend. So if you like, you can compare these two to each other, but if you don't want to bother with that, don't worry about it. You can just not specify either one and play around with just the default. The single search method was developed in a collaboration between ROR and Crossref, led by ROR product manager Adam Buttrick, who is here, and again, Dominika Zacek. They wrote a lovely series on matching for the ROR and Crossref blogs that you can read on the ROR blog. And it should be noted as well that versions of that single search strategy are being used at both OpenAlex and Crossref. I think they've probably both modified it to an extent for their specific needs. But it's important to note, too, that this matching service that we're talking about is totally open source. Anyone is welcome to use it and adopt it for your own specific matching tasks. And if you're a developer, you should know that you can get the ROR API code in its entirety from GitHub and run that locally using Docker. We'll go on now to talking about these demonstrations. So again, when we do these exercises, there are a number of ways that you can test this out. If you're not a developer, one of the easiest is just to go to this link and type in any affiliation string. This is really built to compare the multi-search and single search strategies, but you can just use it to look at the single search, which is the default and recommended one if you like. Really nice GUI. I did want to mention that this is how you URL encode a string if you need to, or one of the ways in which you can do it. You can just go to this website, paste something in. It will turn all the spaces to %20. It will turn all the commas to %2c, all of that kind of thing. So you can just URL encode your strings right there. And then if you want to, this is what I do kind of all the time, is I'm querying our ROR API in a browser. Depending on which browser you use, this works a little better or worse. This is showing a query of the ROR API in Chrome, but I have a special plugin installed called JSON Viewer Pro. But you can see here, I'm querying the ROR API using the affiliation parameter and just typing in this string. We get 10 results back, which is always going to be the case for the single search strategy. And here you can see that the first item is selected as a match, and here is what the match is to that string. Here is the ROR ID that matches that string. What isn't shown in this image is that I don't go into any of those other 10 results. But these little arrows on the left-hand side will collapse and expand the results so that you can explore the other results if you like, but really you're looking for one of those results that is chosen true. There will always be only one result that is selected as a potential match, and there are cases where it can't find a match. So you always want to look, this will always be the first if there is a chosen true match, but if it's false, you don't want to select it. It could be right even though the algorithm doesn't know if it's right, but at any rate, that's a thing you'll want to play around with when we get to the exercises momentarily. If you're comfortable with the command line, you can use curl to play around with this affiliation strategy. So here, really, this is the exact same query, but I'm using curl and I've told it to display things, display the JSON in a pretty way. So again, it's the exact same query. It's the chosen true result is the first one, and that leads to the ROR ID for Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. All right, so now we get to work on this ourselves. So we should have, what I'd like us to do is take 10 minutes, stay video off, open this link. I see someone has shared the code, and thank you, Joseph. I'm going to stay on this slide for now, but feel free to open that document. These instructions are also in the document. What we're going to do is take 10 minutes. We're going to be quiet. We're going to be video off, but we're going to stay on this Zoom call. And then we're going to go into this document and look at just do some of the exercises that I just demonstrated. Do whatever you like. Go read the ROR code. Go play around with the matching strategy in the GUI. Do whatever you like. Track down the code on GitHub. Look at it there. Do whatever you like. And then take notes about it. And then if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We will monitor those. Hopefully there won't be so many that will get behind, but we're happy to answer questions. And then, just please don't say anything aloud. We'll give everybody a chance to work quietly and play with this ourselves. I will set a timer for 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, which will be, or actually we'll be at 42 minutes past the hour, we'll come back and we'll have nearly 20 minutes to discuss what we found. I'll probably be snooping around at your answers in the document as well. Is that all clear? All right. I'm going to leave this screen up, but let's go to the document. Let's all go video off and let's go play around with this. So that's our 10 minutes. I hope people are busily exploring. I see a few people adding notes in the document. So feel free to come video off if you like now, and we can have a discussion. Let me see if I can get people to one sec, blah, blah. Yes, so now you have the ability to unmute yourself as well. You can undo your video. So I did see one question in the document that I did think was interesting. In the quote that I mentioned from the blog post that we published in 2019 about building the affiliation matching, the notion that some of these strings include multiple affiliations was raised. So somebody asked in the document about that, and I didn't provide any text strings for that. I know that OpenAlex had some means of handling that, but Adam, did you want to say any more about that? Like what happens if, in general, how does our matching service handle if a string includes multiple affiliations?
It really depends on the input. It will either be biased towards choosing one or the other, or it will fail to resolve the match because the affiliation matching strategy is designed around a principle of one-to-one for affiliation string and ROR ID match. This is what allows it to be fast, efficient, and run at a scale while being super precise. Once you introduce the challenge of multiple organizations in a given affiliation string, you have to rebalance things towards a measure we call recall, meaning identifying all of the organizations that are present in a set of affiliation strings. It's possible to do that, and we're working on some affiliation matching strategies, but it is less efficient and comes with a different set of challenges.
Yeah. Now, and Adam, I know you've been deep down in this data for a long time. Are you? I
Sure.
have to say, how common is that strings have in the real data that they have these multiple affiliations?
Yeah, empirically, I don't know what the distribution is. I would say that there's not a not insignificant portion that contain multiple organizations, although there's a lot of variation in terms of levels of hierarchy or how those should be interpreted. So, yeah, Ivana, for example, is pointing out that in France, multi-organization affiliations are very common, which is true. That's probably the most complex edge case of any affiliation matching strategy, meaning if you can solve resolution of all of the organizations that are asserted in a complex French affiliation string, then you know you're like your affiliation matching strategy is Turing complete or something. But um, more generally, the the structure of multi-organization strings tends to follow a hierarchical pattern such that it's not incorrect necessarily resolved to, for example, the parent organization over a subunit that is at a more granular level of representation.
Yeah, that's interesting. When we first interviewed Justin from who was at the time with OpenAlex, he mentioned that France was particularly difficult. And for those of you who don't know, ROR has worked very closely with CNRS in France to especially create records for all of those UMRs, those universités or units, those mixed research units or whatever, which are in themselves kind of like multiply located. It's not the same thing as multiple affiliations, but yeah, France is complex. Good point.
Yeah, yeah. So those often provide an example of the complexity that I was just talking about, where, for example, there will be a very specific French research unit that is asserted, often identified by a code like UMR 12345. And then separately, all parent organizations will also be listed for that UMR. Now, if we model that data correctly in ROR and we have the research unit and the parents indicated, resolving actually just to that unit is probably the better matching choice
Mm-hmm.
because then you can infer the parents versus trying to separately resolve all.
So we have a question in the chat. I'm going to scroll down to a couple of these as well. But we have a question in the chat from Lindsay McCallum who asks, if there's no match found, how do we know what additional information needs to be provided? I'll let you address this as well, Adam, but I will just say that our general recommendation is that if the algorithm can't find a match, probably a person needs to look at it. Um, we do find in some cases that those things where there is no again, I'm not sure you're going to get out of having a human being look at it, but once people do look at it, sometimes we can make changes to the ROR data that will make it match in the future. So, say for instance, I just came across an instance recently where University of Copenhagen is sometimes referred to as Copenhagen University, possibly the other way around, I can't remember. And one of those is not listed as an alias. So we could change the record to list that as an alias, and then the match would succeed. Does that answer your question, Lindsay, or do you want to add anything else, Adam?
Yeah, so that's generally correct. The first thing is obviously, of course, if you can't find a match, to make sure the organization exists in ROR. If it doesn't,
Yeah.
submit a curation request for it to be added. But then, yeah, normally it can be the case that there's a name variant that's included in the affiliation string that is needs to be added to the record. Similarly, sometimes a given variant name can be so broad that it introduces collisions and it's not resolvable. So, for example, if it's, University Hospital 2 or something like that, and there are multiple records for that, it's very difficult to determine which it should refer to. So that's a case where a person would have to intervene.
Mm-hmm. And Sippy asks, can I enrich the data to help the matching? Yeah, absolutely. You can ask us to enrich it upstream, to change it upstream, but you can also run all of this data locally and enrich it locally if you want. It's probably better to ask us at ROR to change the data so that everyone who uses ROR can do it. But yeah, sure, you could enrich that locally. A few other questions. Let's go back to the notes. Jason here is talking about acronyms, so that NASA, again, there could be multiple. If NASA, if you put in the string NASA and it doesn't have a match, there could be two ways to address that. We could change the way the matching works to, I think acronyms are excluded on purpose. Is that correct, Adam? I can't remember.
In the single search strategy, they're excluded. Yes, that's correct.
Right, right. So we could just make sure so adding NASA as an acronym wouldn't help, and it probably is already there. So yeah, we could look at ways to better handle acronyms for
Yeah,
sure.
so what we do in some cases is we can change the type of a variant name, for example, for a NASA to be an alias versus an acronym when it's being actually used, although it is, in the most technical sense and that's, most correct sense, an acronym. If its actual use is as a variant
Right.
name or an alias, we can index it, which will then make it a viable candidate for search and matching.
Yeah, that's right. And that happened with CERN as well recently, as I recall. Like
Exactly.
everybody calls
That's
it
correct.
CERN. It's
Right.
barely even an acronym at this point. It's basically just another name. So yeah.
Yep, actually, yeah, CERN is actually a deprecated former name for the organization. So yeah, but
Gotcha.
it's the most commonly used one.
Uh, gotcha. And then I actually think this question from Colin is also really interesting. Only records with the status of active are returned. Can inactive records be included in matching as well? I think you
We
can, right?
don't
I
We don't
forget.
have a flag for this in the
Right.
API at the moment, because it can introduce some unexpected behavior, kind of if you're just coming in and trying to match some things. We're looking at adding a flag to explicitly allow that. So it's kind of you know what you're getting into if you're introducing matches to inactive records. And this is specifically because it does introduce more collisions across names and things like that. So it can reduce the overall rate of matching. It can kind of have results that might be unexpected if you're not familiar with the full kind of history of a set of organizations. But yeah, that's something that we're looking at doing.
What else? Nick, and we've got about 8 more minutes. Do feel free to take off. Let's see. Tested this. Our gun. I'm not surprised that our gun on its own doesn't match anything because that's not really that. It's a name of a place, but not the name of an organization in and of itself. So that I'm not surprised by. Thanks, Anna, for playing with it. Glad you liked the demo. Um, we did also have a comment in the chat from Birgit Velka about multiple affiliations in Berlin. Um, I like this example. I'm going to have to plug that in and
Yeah.
see what it does.
Yeah.
Um, German language notoriously likes
Yeah,
compound
it's
structures. So, yeah.
yeah. So one way to think relative to some of these complex edge cases is one thing to think about is that the affiliation matching strategy is meant to efficiently process the largest number of things that we can very easily resolve to a ROR ID through its matching logic. That doesn't mean that there isn't necessary work or pre-processing that is useful for folks to do locally or for publishers to do to disambiguate some of those strings because in many cases, for example, multi-organization affiliation should really be split into two separate sets of assertions. So the affiliation matching strategy is really good at matching a lot of these things, but it's not a panacea for every metadata problem that can occur in an affiliation string. So,
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. Argonne National Lab. We've got a couple of examples for that. I actually love getting these very specific cases, especially for these, very influential um, organizations. So I'm not sure what Roger is looking at there. We do get, for this string, we get a match, which I'm assuming is to the Argonne National Laboratory. Yep. But there may be other versions of that name that don't. Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, that also seems to be matching. Argonne National Laboratory seems to work. I'd be surprised if that didn't. Jason asks if we've found examples of mismatches between single search and multi-search. Jason, what do you mean by mismatch, actually? There's definitely ones where one strategy finds a match and another doesn't. That happens all the time.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that
yeah.
happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was the multi-search had some heuristics that tended to be overly broad, so it would surface more matches, but it would be overall less precise. It's in the range of probably about 3 to 5% in terms of precision. So that's kind of the expected error rate that is produced.
And what is a sort of a general abstract principle about what causes those mismatches?
Oh,
What do you think?
um, that's there's no one answer.
Oh,
It's normally when there is ambiguity in names that introduces collisions where, um, like conceivably by standard edit distance measures, one or the other could be chosen. Multi-search tended to be biased towards choosing. Like, so imagine there's a set of things where a computer might think that they're the same. Multi-search had a bias towards just picking one of those things. Single search is more precise, so it excludes it.
interesting. Um, we do have 4 more minutes, so I think we're about to wrap up. So ask your questions now. But while you're thinking, I will just mention what I did was that I went and looked at the matching code on Crossref's GitLab. And this is just a thing, I'm only marginally code literate, but I always find it really interesting that these strategies are taking particular terms that are really common in these research organization names and sort of what I think of as manually handling them. Like these terms in particular need special handling. So like this part of the code, it's looking for any string that starts with UNIV, which could be universidad or université or whatever, and transforming that, if I'm reading this correctly, into sort of the full term so that it can do a search on that term. Yeah. I just find that interesting. I don't know. I always think of like an algorithm or a strategy as not needing to specify these particular words, but of course, some of these words do need special handling.
We have a question that I think
Yes.
would be good to address, which is, do you plan to test an approach based on a machine learning algorithm to complement your matching approach? So my background is in machine learning, and actually, as part of the development process for single search, we actually tested multiple approaches that used various machine learning methods to matching, and none of them really outperformed a heuristic-based search approach, specifically because things like classification methods, where you try to directly predict based on training data, or ID assignment, are very brittle over time because the ROR data changes every 2 to 3 weeks. So it's very difficult to train those models in a way that constantly reflects the current state of ROR data. What we did find is that certain forms of parsing or rephrasing of the strings can improve overall recall. So the amount of things that we can predict correctly at a slight hit to precision. So if you think, for example, that the existing strategy performs at 97% precision and mid-70s recall, that would maybe go down to like 93, 94% precision, but then into the 80s on recall. Using those interventions for entity disambiguation is expensive to run at scale, though, because we have to host a kind of model that can parse some of those. So we think that's work that's maybe best left to an asynchronous versus um, kind of real-time API. That being said, I am actually doing some interesting work now around training multi-turn agents to match affiliation strings. So the way these work is that they take an input in the affiliation string, and essentially they search the ROR API just like a person would and try to match an affiliation string. So hopefully we'll have some more and exciting news to share on that in the future.
Yeah, and Adam, at some point, we should get you to write this up in a real publication, or at least put it on archive or something, because you do a lot of this research
Mhm.
that I think a lot of people would be interested in. Um, all right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along. We will send you the slides and recording, and the link to the group notes as well. We thank you for coming, and we'll hope to see you in September. Thanks all. Bye bye.